I dropped the knife when the phone call ended. It hit the kitchen floor and slid under the counter, but I did not pick it up. My hands were still wet from washing the dishes, and the water now dripped onto the floor as I stood motionless. He had forgotten again. That night was supposed to be special, our 10th wedding anniversary. I had spent the whole day preparing. I made his favorite meal, ironed his shirt, and even set the table with candles. But he called only to say he would be home late. No reason, no mention of the date, not even a word of thanks. I turned off the stove and threw the food into containers. The house was too quiet except for the low sound of the radio in the living room, playing a slow song that only made the silence worse. I sat down alone at the table that still held 2 plates, 2 glasses, and a bottle of wine that would not be opened that night. That was not the first time he forgot. Birthdays, small achievements, even doctor's appointments. They all passed without notice from him. At first, I had made excuses for him. He was busy. He was tired. He had work. But after years of empty rooms and colder nights, I stopped trying to explain his silence. It had not always been like this. We were different people when we met. He used to ask about my dreams, laugh at my silly thoughts, and touch my hand when no one was watching. I remembered the first time he held my hand in the park. He was nervous, and his hand was warm. I had believed in that warmth. I had believed it would last. Now, we shared a home, but not a life. I could walk through our days without hearing his voice. He no longer looked me in the eye. He answered my questions with short replies, sometimes with nothing at all. When we sat together on the sofa, we were strangers. There were no fights, no words, only silence, and that silence became a wall between us. One evening, I watched him from the kitchen window as he parked his car. He stayed inside it for 5 full minutes before coming in. When he finally walked through the door, he did not glance at me. He dropped his bag on the chair and went straight to the shower. That night, I listened as the water ran behind the bathroom door and tried to remember the last time he had touched my face. I could not. The worst part was how normal it had become. I smiled when neighbors asked how we were. I laughed with my colleagues when they joked about married life. I shared old photos on social media, pretending they were recent. Behind every picture was a truth I could not share. I was invisible in my own marriage. Sometimes I tried. I made his favorite breakfast on weekends, hoping he would stay home longer. I suggested we go for a walk or watch a movie together. His answers were always the same. Not now. I'm busy. Maybe later. But later never came. There was a moment, months ago, that stayed in my mind. I had been sick with a fever. I lay in bed, weak and sweating, and I waited for him to come check on me. He did not once. He slept in the other room that night because, he said, he had work early in the morning. That night, I realized something had broken. Not with a sound or a fight, but like glass under snow, slow, silent, and complete. I began to keep a journal, something I had not done since my teenage years. In it, I wrote the small details he missed. The new haircut he did not notice, the book I finished, the rain that soaked my shoes. I did not write for him. I wrote to remember that I still existed, that my days had meaning, even if he did not see them. Once, I left the journal open on the table. It was not a mistake. I hoped he would read it, say something, ask something. But he walked past it without stopping. Later, I moved it back to the drawer, and the hope with it. Just before we continue, let us know which city and country you are listening this story from. And I would love if you could subscribe. It helps me share more stories like this. People think pain comes with yelling and crying, but my pain came with silence, with cold dinners, closed doors, and quiet nights. It came with empty chairs, messages left unread, and birthdays spent alone. It came slowly, like winter creeping through the walls of a house. One morning, I watched him leave for work without saying goodbye. He picked up his bag, checked his phone, and walked out. I stood by the window as his car turned the corner, and in that moment, something in me shifted, not with anger, but with clarity. I no longer wanted to wait for love. I no longer wanted to beg for words or chase memories that no longer lived in our home. That evening, I packed a small bag and went to stay with my sister. I left a note on the kitchen table. It was short. I told him I needed space. I told him I needed to remember who I was before I became invisible. I did not ask him to follow me. My sister welcomed me with quiet eyes and open arms. She did not ask many questions. She simply made tea and let me sit in silence. That night, I slept without fear. I heard my own breathing and felt the soft rhythm of peace for the first time in years. The next morning, I checked my phone. No message, no missed call, no question asking where I was. It hurt more than I expected, but it also confirmed what I already knew. I was no longer needed in that house. Perhaps I had not been for a long time. Spent the next few days at my sister's place, surrounded by soft voices and simple kindness. She lived alone with her cat, a quiet creature that followed me from room to room, as if it understood I needed company. Each morning she made coffee and left me a cup on the table before leaving for work. That small act felt louder than anything I had received in years. In her spare bedroom, I began to look through old boxes I had brought with me. Not many, just enough to hold my journals, some clothes, and a few forgotten photographs. In one photo, I saw us smiling, holding hands near a lake. We looked happy, but memory is often a kind liar. I stared at the image and asked myself when that version of us had disappeared. Not overnight, but piece by piece, like dust settling on a table until you no longer see the surface beneath. I tried not to check my phone too often, but the truth is, I did. I expected nothing, and that is exactly what I received. No questions, no apology, no, I miss you. And even though I had already accepted the distance, part of me still waited for a sign that he cared enough to notice I was gone. It never came. Instead, I spent my evenings walking through the park near my sister's building. I watched children play, older couples walk hand in hand, and teenagers laughing into their phones. Life moved forward, and I had stood still for too long. Now, with every step, I felt something shift inside me. Not strength, not yet, but a space opening where pain had lived too long. One night, as I sat on a bench watching the sky turn from blue to gold, I remembered a promise I had made to myself before marriage. I had promised never to disappear for someone else's comfort. I had promised to always speak, always try, always love myself first. Somewhere along the line, I had broken that promise. So I made it again, this time with firmer hands and a quieter heart. I would not return to a house where I felt alone. I would not live in a silence that made me doubt my own voice. If he wanted to reach me, he would need to cross the bridge he had burned with his forgetfulness. And if he did not, I would still walk on. Alone perhaps, but no longer invisible. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I traced the lines on my face, the quiet curve of tiredness around my eyes, and I whispered the truth. I am still here, and I matter. The first week passed in quiet recovery. I began to feel my body relax in ways I had forgotten were possible. There were no sudden phone calls demanding answers, no footsteps echoing in cold hallways, no eyes that looked past me. In their place was stillness, a gentle kind of emptiness, the kind that heals. I spent time reading books I had left unfinished. Some had been on our living room shelf for years, their pages stiff from waiting. Now they opened easily, like old friends glad to be remembered. I walked more often. I slept better. My appetite returned. These were small things, but they added up, reminding me that I was still capable of joy. But not everything was peaceful. Some nights, memories came back uninvited. They walked into my thoughts when the lights were off and the silence returned. I would lie in bed and recall moments that once made me smile. A shared laugh over morning coffee, a soft kiss on my shoulder, his arm across my back during a storm. The warmth in those memories was still real, and it made the present feel colder by comparison. I did not hate him. That was the hardest part. It would have been easier if I did. Hate gives you something to hold, something to push against. But I only felt distance, like standing on one side of a frozen lake while the person you once loved stood on the other, neither willing to walk across. My sister asked if I had heard from him. I shook my head. She did not push. She only poured more tea and sat beside me, saying nothing, which was exactly what I needed. She had been through a divorce 5 years earlier. I had not understood her pain back then. I do now. The second week brought new clarity. I began to question the life I had lived before. Not only the marriage, but everything around it. The way I had stopped wearing the colors I liked because he preferred dull ones. The way I had stopped listening to my favorite music because it gave him headaches. The way I had changed my work hours, my habits, my speech, slowly, invisibly, until I was no longer myself. That night, I slept deeply and woke with no sadness. Only breath, only light, only the first sense that something new was waiting. 3 weeks after I left, I saw him again. Not by plan, not by invitation. I was walking through the grocery store near my sister's apartment. It was like waking from a long sleep and realizing someone else had lived inside your skin. I thought about going back. Not to the marriage, but to the woman I used to be. The one who painted on weekends and laughed too loud in cafes. The one who made friends easily and never needed permission to speak. One afternoon, I walked into a small bookstore near the park. A young woman behind the counter smiled and asked if I needed help. I said no, I was just looking. But inside, I felt like I was searching for something deeper. I spent over an hour walking between the shelves. I bought a notebook with a green cover and a pen with a soft blue grip. When I returned home, I opened the first page and began to write. Not about him, but about me. I wrote about my first bike, the dog I loved as a child, the teacher who believed in my poems. I wrote about the first time I saw the ocean and the sound it made. I wrote about the things I wanted to do again. Visit Italy, take a cooking class, dance without caring who was watching. These were not big dreams, but they were mine. On the 15th day, I finally received a message. Not a call, just a few lines on my screen. "Are you coming back?" No hello. No question about how I was. No apology. Just a single sentence, as cold as our last dinner together. I did not reply. 2 days later, another message came. "I don't understand why you left. You could have said something." That made me sit still for a long time. I had said something, many times, in many ways, but he had never listened. The real truth was that I had stopped talking long ago because I knew it made no difference. He sent one more message the following week. "This is your home too. I didn't do anything wrong." And in that moment, I knew I would never return. Not because he had failed me once, but because he still did not see the failure. He saw a house. I had wanted a home. He saw a routine. I had wanted a relationship. He saw no wrong, because he had never looked closely enough to see the cracks. I deleted the messages. That weekend, I went with my sister to a local art show. It was held in a small hall with sunlight pouring through the windows. The walls were filled with paintings and photographs, each one telling a story. I stood in front of a painting of a woman standing alone in a red dress. Her face was calm, but her eyes held something deeper. A quiet strength, perhaps, or the memory of pain. I stared at it for a long time. Later that night, I opened my green notebook again. I wrote one sentence. "I am learning to be alone, and it is not the same as being lonely." That was the beginning of something new. I did not know where the path would lead, but I knew I had taken the first step, and that was enough for now. The next morning, I walked through a small weekend market not far from the gallery. There were stalls of handmade candles, colorful scarves, and home-baked bread. I stopped to smell a bar of soap shaped like a flower. The scent reminded me of something, or someone, but I could not place it. That happened more often now. My memories had started to change shape. They no longer hurt as sharply. They faded like fog in sunlight. One of the sellers, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and gentle eyes, asked if I wanted to try some lotion. Her voice was kind, and I found myself talking to her for longer than I expected. She told me how she had started her small business after leaving a 20-year marriage. She had moved to this city with nothing but an idea and a suitcase. She laughed when she said it, but I saw the truth behind her smile. I told her a little about myself, not everything, but enough. When I said I had left my marriage, she did not ask why. She simply said, "Good. You saved yourself time." I walked away from her stall with a small jar of cream and a strange feeling of hope. That evening, I cooked for the first time since I had left home. Not because anyone expected it, but because I wanted to. I made something simple: soup, bread, and a salad. My sister lit a candle and put on soft music. We ate slowly and talked about small things. There was no tension, no walls. I was beginning to feel like a person again, not a shadow. Before bed, I stood by the window and looked out at the quiet street. I wondered if he was sitting alone in our living room, if he even noticed my absence in a real way. Or had I already become part of the furniture, something seen but no longer felt? I did not wish him pain. I wished him clarity. I wished he would one day understand what love requires. Not gifts, not perfect words, but attention, presence, and the simple act of noticing when the person beside you is slowly fading away. That night, I slept deeply and woke with no sadness. Only breath, only light, only the first sense that something new was waiting. 3 weeks after I left, I saw him again. Not by plan, not by invitation. I was walking through the grocery store near my sister's apartment, picking up some vegetables and coffee, when I looked up and there he was. He stood in front of the bread shelf, looking at a loaf of sourdough, the same kind I used to buy for us every Sunday. He looked older, more tired. He had not shaved, and there were deep shadows under his eyes. For a moment, he did not see me. I could have turned and walked away, but I stood still. When his eyes finally found mine, there was a pause, like something catching in the air. His mouth opened slightly, but he did not speak. I gave a small nod, then turned to continue down the aisle. He followed me. I did not need to hear his footsteps to know he was behind me. I felt the shift in space, the pressure of his presence. I stopped near the milk section and turned toward him. Still, he said nothing. I watched his face, looking for any sign of the man I had once trusted, once waited for, once loved. There was nothing familiar there anymore, only confusion and regret. but not the kind that changes anything, just the kind that arrives too late. I nodded again, a quiet goodbye, and walked to the checkout. He did not follow me past that point. When I returned home, I placed the groceries on the table and sat down. I waited for tears, for something to rise up, but nothing did. My hands were steady. My heart was quiet. The next day, I opened my journal and began writing a letter, not to him, to myself. I wrote about the years I had stayed silent, about the small ways I had tried to keep love alive, about the nights I lay in bed hoping he would turn toward me, about the holidays spent pretending we were fine, and about the moment I realized I deserved more than survival. I did not write with anger. I wrote with peace. Then I folded the letter and placed it in the back of my journal. Not to read again, but to mark the end of a chapter. In the weeks that followed, I began building a new rhythm. I found part-time work at a nearby bookstore. The hours were simple, the people kind. I joined a painting class on Saturdays. I met women who shared their own stories of love, of loss, of rebuilding. We were different, but our pain had similar shapes. We listened, we laughed, we understood. One evening, my sister and I went to a small poetry reading. It was held in a cozy cafe, the kind with mismatched chairs and fairy lights. A woman stood at the microphone, her voice soft but steady. She read a poem about forgetting who you are, and then remembering. The words did not try to be clever. They were plain, but they carried weight. After the reading, I approached her to say thank you. She smiled and said she was glad the poem found a home in someone else's heart. We spoke for a few minutes. She was gentle, thoughtful, and open. Her presence reminded me of still water, calm but deep. That night, I lay awake and thought about the future. For the first time, it did not frighten me. I no longer saw it as a long, empty road. I saw it as a field with many paths. Some would be hard, some would lead nowhere. But I was walking again, and I was not walking back. A month after I left, he sent one final message. I'm sorry. I didn't know how bad it had become. I read it twice, then placed the phone on the table. There was nothing more to say. Apology without change is noise, and I had already learned to live in quiet. I did not reply. Instead, I picked up my notebook and began writing a new list. Not of regrets, but of hopes. I wanted to travel to the coast and feel the sea wind on my face. I wanted to try dancing again, even if I had forgotten the steps. I wanted to cook for friends, sing badly in the shower, and laugh until my cheeks hurt. I wanted to build a life that did not depend on someone else's attention to feel real. I had lost years, but I had not lost myself, not completely. She had been waiting, quietly, patiently.